Hi, and thanks for joining us for this session on Meetings 101. We're going to discuss and share some resources for effective meetings. My name is Tara Kuipers, and I'm a prevention specialist with the Center for Health and Safety Culture at Montana State University. I have a focus in adult education and teaching and learning adult learners, and also an expertise in facilitation and group dynamics. I work from my home near Cody, Wyoming, where I love to play and enjoy the outdoors near Yellowstone National Park in Northwest Wyoming. And as I do my work for the Center for Health and Safety Culture, which is based at MSU in Bozeman, Montana, just a few hours north of Cody, I want to share with you the work of the Center for Health and Safety Culture. We're an interdisciplinary center, and we serve communities and organizations through research, training, and guidance to cultivate healthy and safe cultures. A lot of our work focuses on the areas of violence prevention and substance abuse, traffic safety, and child well-being. And while those are very different topics and cover a lot of various disciplines, one of the things they have in common is that we have a lot of meetings, as I'm sure you do too, meetings with stakeholders and partners and colleagues and peers to help accomplish the work that you do. And so for this session on meetings, we're going to discuss a few key areas. First of all, we're going to consider together and think about what makes a meeting effective from your perspective. We're also going to discuss two keys for effective meetings that we see as important reminders as we approach meetings. And then we're going to share some tools and resources and tips to help with your future meetings to make them more effective. Before we dive into that, I want to ask you to just think for a moment. Think about a meeting from your experience that you would label effective. Perhaps it was something in your professional life, or maybe a committee or board that you serve on in your community. Just think about one meeting in particular that you've attended that you would label as an effective meeting. So think about that time in your experience, and maybe you're starting to capture in your mind's eye a snapshot of that meeting. And as you're capturing that snapshot in your mind and thinking about an effective meeting from your past, I want you to think about some specifics, perhaps who was involved, what was done or what was accomplished, what were some of the tasks that you achieved at that meeting, and how did it feel? What was the tone? What was the feeling that you had as you were part of that meeting? I hope each of you have been able to think and maybe capture a specific time or a specific meeting in your mind's eye. And if we were to gather in a room, I would maybe ask you each to share some of the qualities or characteristics of that meeting that you found effective. And if we did that, some of you might say it was effective because it was efficient. We got a lot done and we made a really good use of our time. Others might say that it was about participation, that it was who was in the room and that everyone was fully engaged and fully had a chance to participate. Some of you might say, I just really enjoyed it because it felt good. The tone was comfortable. We were able to get a lot done in an enjoyable atmosphere. Others of you might think about the leadership of the meeting, who was leading and guiding the meeting, and perhaps that's what labels it as an effective meeting for you. Sometimes we might think about just overall good behavior. There wasn't a lot of sidetracks or disruptive behaviors, but in general, everyone is on good behavior. And perhaps you think about the outcomes or the productivity, that you got a lot done in that meeting and it was productive, and that's why it was effective. If we were to ask 5 or 10 people to share what made a meeting effective for them, I'm sure we would get 5 or 10 different responses. But often when we cluster them together, we see two key themes or two key ideas for effective meetings that I'd like to share with you now. A lot of the elements that make a meeting effective can be grouped into one of these two areas. First of all, effective meetings do a good job of balancing both tasks and relationships. And secondly, effective meetings create a sense of shared ownership. So we're going to take each of these and discuss them a little bit more. and how they really do serve as keys for effective meetings that we as meeting attendees and also meeting leaders can keep at the top of our mind. So first of all, the sense of balance of tasks and relationships. When we think about this idea of task and relationship balance, we keep in mind that there's work that we need to get done, but there's also a relationship that we need to preserve among the individuals that are part of this group and part of this meeting together. Often I think about it in this way, that we are balancing constantly content and process. As meeting leaders or meeting guides or facilitators of a meeting, we should always keep these two elements of any meeting in mind. First, we have content or purpose. It's the what. What are we really coming together to do or to discuss? What topics do we have at hand? And what are we going to need in terms of information to lead us to the product or the decision that we're aiming for? We also have to consider the process or the approach. This is the how. How are we going to relate to each other? How are we going to relate to the information in order to get us to that product or to that decision? Focusing on content or purpose sets us firmly in the area of what, the topics and the information. Focusing on process or approach plants us firmly in the area of how. How are we going to get us there? And what kind of experience are we going to create? With balance, task, and relationship as one of our keys, the second key is creating a sense of shared ownership. And when we think about sharing ownership or sharing partnership in a meeting, we often think about how we are distributing ownership of that meeting between the leader or the convener or the guide and the attendee or the participant. The different folks involved in making the meeting effective, we have to consider sharing ownership between those two types of people. So we maybe have a leader or a small group of leaders. And if you're a leader of a meeting, we really have to focus on sharing responsibility. How do we invite people in to get the work of the meeting accomplished? If we're an attendee, we have to think about how can we continually gain more buy-in? What kinds of things do we need to know or be able to do in order to feel bought in to the topic or to the task at hand? So as a meeting leader, we have to think about how we approach every meeting by balancing not just a laundry list of tasks and topics, but also how we are going to approach those tasks and topics to make the right experience or the right process come to life. And as a meeting leader or an attendee, we have to think how we continually create a sense of shared ownership. How do I, as a leader or a convener, continue to extend the invitation for more people to get involved and to share that sense of ownership to get the tasks done and create a deeper sense of partnership? So with those two things in mind, the balance of task and relationship and the sense of shared ownership, I want to share a few tools and resources that I often find helpful when I'm convening and leading meetings that I think might help as you go into your future of meetings as well. One of the first concepts that I like to think about when I think about meeting preparation is the 80-20 rule. So when I think of 80-20, you may hear this in other areas of our life, like 20% of people get 80% of the work done, or maybe in health and our diet, which is why there's a picture of pie there to chuckle a little bit, that maybe 80% of our diet needs to be healthy, while 20% can be indulgence. We often hear this 80-20 rule come up in different areas of our life. How I want to share it with you is the sense of how we're preparing for meetings. So the 80-20 rule applied to meetings is that 80% of the work of having a successful meeting comes before the meeting ever begins. It's the preparation and the planning work that goes in advance of the meeting. If we're focusing the greatest majority of our time in the preparation and planning, we still have to make sure that we're tuning into details and being effective leaders when we're in the meeting. But most of that effectiveness in the meeting comes in our preparation and planning before we ever walk in the door. So, with the resources and tools that I want to share with you, we really are going to focus on the preparation phase. When I'm preparing for a meeting, large or small, I often think about a preparation phase in terms of these 5 Ps. These 5 concepts that really, for me, help me prepare well and think through and do my due diligence and homework before a meeting ever begins. The first P is for purpose. If we can articulate the purpose, the overall aim or goal, why are we getting this group of people together? Maybe it's an ongoing group that meets weekly or monthly or quarterly. Maybe it's a once in a while or maybe once ever group of people coming together. Even for those regular ongoing meetings, we still have to do ourselves the service of asking why. What is the purpose and how can we connect to that overall aim or goal? Secondly, we have to think about the product and articulate what we want to produce or create in order to help us achieve our purpose. Now, a product might be something very tangible, like a document or an agreement or a timeline. It might be something not as tangible, maybe more of an idea or an agreement or a shared sense of purpose or sharing information with each other. What do we want to have as a result of our meeting? What do we want to show for it by the time the meeting is over? The third P stands for people. As part of our preparation for being an effective meeting leader, we have to think about the people who are going to be involved and not just the number of people, how many we can expect so that we have the right number of chairs or snacks before the meeting begins. But we also have to think about the people in terms of who they are. What is their affiliation? What is their background? Are they representing maybe another group or a certain perspective or stance? If we do our homework and really think about the people who are involved and what we can do to help them be successful in this meeting, we'll be more successful as meeting leaders. Probable issues are things that might be potential roadblocks or areas of resistance that we might need to grapple with in a meeting. Sometimes probable issues or resistance can come out of the blue unexpectedly. But often, if we look at the agenda and think about the kind of work that we need to do together in the meeting, we can sometimes forecast or foreshadow what some issues might be, and as a leader, be prepared to address them and handle them effectively. The fifth P is process, or the steps that the facilitator or the guide or the leader of the meeting will use to achieve a desired result. So we've seen that word process before in terms of the how. How are we going to get the work of this group accomplished? So these 5 Ps, the purpose and the product, really help us orient to the big picture. What do we have as our overall goal, and what do we need to do to help us achieve that overall goal or purpose? Who is involved? What are some potential areas that we might need to be prepared for that could present challenges? And then what steps are we going to take to help us get to that articulated purpose? One of the other things that comes into preparation for a meeting is the idea of goals. What are the goals that we have? Back to that discussion on purpose. What are we really here to accomplish? And I often think about kind of a long and silly acronym, but it's something that often helps me and in my mind articulate the goals that I have as a leader or a convener for the meetings that I lead. This long acronym BTTWLWWH seems silly and kind of clumsy, but what it does is help in my mind set up a sentence that I want to be able to finish as a meeting leader. The beginning of that sentence is, by the time we leave, we will have what exactly? What are the things that I hope we can accomplish? And by the time we leave this meeting, what will we have to show for it that means that we've been effective and have been successful? Perhaps in its agreement, perhaps it's a document, perhaps it's just a sense of renewed purpose or shared information. By the time we leave, we will have accomplished these things that we've set out to do. Not only do I, as a meeting leader, hope to be able to articulate this myself, but also be able to share it with participants, maybe when I'm sending an email invitation or starting a meeting in my opening announcements. In addition to preparation, I want to also discuss meeting flow. Once we're in the meeting, how can we really think about having an effective flow so that we can stay on track, that we can cover all of the things we need to cover, but in a way that feels productive and effective and natural? So, when it comes to meeting flow, the first thing I want to think about is what is the sequence of the topics that we're going to cover? And are they in a logical sequence in our agenda? I'm a big fan of using sticky notes. And so, when I think of sticky notes and building an agenda, I often take all of the topics that we need to cover in a meeting and put each of them down on a separate piece of paper. Doesn't have to be a sticky note, perhaps it's just blank scraps of paper, and I set them in front of me and really think about the right flow. Perhaps I know that someone has to come late or leave early. And so I want to make sure that topics are covered so that the ones relevant to that person can be covered in the right timing. Perhaps I see on those sticky notes or scraps of paper that 2 or 3 agenda items are really related to finances or budget. And I may want to group them together so that they can naturally come together as an effective meeting flow. Other things that I think of with meeting flow includes timing. Am I really being realistic with how much time that we've allocated, not just for the meeting overall, but for each of the different topics that we have to cover? We might look at our agenda and think, wow, we have 4 or 5 topics that could take each 30 minutes per topic, and we're only allocating 90 minutes for our meeting. We then really need to adjust our flow. If we also see that some of our meetings are being overtaken with a lot of visiting and social time where people are connecting, I also have to ask if I'm using my pre and my post meeting time wisely. Perhaps instead of using meeting time for social connections, we can gather maybe 15 or 30 minutes before the meeting for a cup of coffee, or invite people to stay after the meeting is adjourned so that we can stay on track and on focus and help the meeting flow during the time that we have allocated. We're often encouraged to think outside the box. And when it comes to meeting leadership and effective meetings, I also want us to think outside of the meeting, not just what happens in the meeting in terms of what we're going to do to make the agenda and make our time flow, and also not just what we're doing in preparation, but all of the other things that happen outside of meetings. One of those things being communication. How is communication happening? Is there too much or not enough between meetings? And what kinds of adjustments might be able to be made to make that between meeting time more effective? Maybe it's better communication, more advanced communication, earlier announcements of future meetings, and things of that nature. Also, we have to consider as a meeting leader what kinds of meeting minutes or notes are being captured and how are they being shared with people. This is important not only to be a reminder for the people who attended the meeting of actions taken or commitments made, but it's also crucial for people who weren't at the meeting, who want to be kept in the loop or catch up so that they're prepared and ready when they're attending at the next meeting. So sharing that information in a useful and in a timely way is a very big responsibility. Outside of the meeting, when I'm communicating with attendees or participants and sharing information, I really think about creating a sense of invitation and expectation. It's being invitational of how we want people to be encouraged to be involved and be encouraged to attend and contribute, and also setting up expectations of how the time is going to be used, what topics are going to be covered, and how we can set people up with appropriate and correct expectations so that they come ready to be productive. So let's circle back to where we started, thinking about that meeting that you labeled effective. Perhaps some of the things we talked about today in terms of creating a balance between task and relationship, or sharing ownership between the meeting leader and the meeting attendees, perhaps some of the tools and preparation steps and ideas about meeting leadership are going to help you not just picture in your mind an effective meeting, but lead more effective meetings as you go forward. Thank you so much for learning alongside us about having more effective meetings in the work that you do.